instructor or as a department chair, I might work really hard on a document that I want to share, you know, it has great information that I want to share with my students or with my faculty members. And when I go to send that out by email, let's say, maybe I just forgot to attach that document. So I think we've probably all had that happen before where someone says, wait, I don't see the attachment, right? So then all that takes is I attach it, send another email. Um, Things like that happen to students in our classes. So one example of that might be if we have an assignment that's a file upload. So maybe they upload the file, submit, and then realize that, oops, I forgot to include my source information, or that was, you know, not the most updated version of the file. So by being really inflexible and saying, sorry, you've turned that in, you don't get another opportunity to submit, maybe that's not the most reasonable we can be, right? Maybe if we give them another opportunity to submit that, or even to send it by email if you don't want to increase your number of submissions. Also, with teaching virtually, we all have times where we lose internet, right? I know I have had it times where all of a sudden you're in the middle of something and you know you have a little surge or you lose internet access. So if a student's in the middle of something, a test or uploading an assignment, and they lose internet access, then you know that's a legitimate issue that they didn't cause that. So those are just some examples of how we can be reasonable and allow students to submit things. They've still done the work. We're not giving them a freebie. We're not giving them free points. We're just giving them an opportunity to earn those points when something happens in their lives.
So we could really go through a whole course, a whole 16 weeks on how to be reasonable. But in your interest and ours, we have broken it down to 4 main components that we see as being the most important. So communication, course policies, flexibility, and technology.
So the first thing that we're going to talk about is communication, and your students need just as much communication in an online setting as they did when they were taking face-to-face classes. So 3 main avenues that we want to talk about here are announcements, which are very, very important communication tools, your tone in communication, and sometimes the tone that you don't recognize or you're not aware of, and the way that you answer student questions, not just the manner in which you ask them, but also how quickly you respond to students as being a really important factor.
So for most of us, announcements are probably the easiest way to communicate to the entire class all at once. And I know that I do this. I send feedback announcements just overall, like, hey, essay 1, these are the things I saw, these are things we can work on. So I want you guys to look at this example from an instructor to their students, giving some class-wide feedback. And you're going to see some things. I know it's kind of small, but some things should be jumping out at you. The use of all caps, use of an exclamation point. And also in here, there's no discussion from the instructor of how to get better. It just says get better, but it doesn't really tell them how. So Natalie, can you show us a better way to do this?
Of course she can. She's Natalie.
Huh. So this communicates some of those same things, right? That maybe there were some issues in that first discussion board. I don't know about you, but I usually always have issues the first time around with, you know, grammar maybe or source information. So I think it's important to provide resources. So you see there's a link there to the tutoring center if they need some help. And I've tried to point out some of the things, you know, that in other words, I put it in a positive spin. I want you to earn your highest points possible. So remember, you know, there's a word count, or remember that grammar counts, so that it's more encouraging, like, let's get you more points. Let's get you in a better situation versus, you know, you did bad and that's all I'm going to leave it at, right? So anyway, just if you can offer up how to improve in some way or what your expectations are, and encourage them.
And announcements are just really good general tools for communication. And you don't have to read all of this. Don't try to squint at the screen while you're reading it. We have lots of research about how instructors effectively use announcements to communicate with faculty or with students about what's coming up, how to connect new lessons to previous lessons, keeping students on track, giving them friendly reminders, If they've submitted a paper and just saying, hey, you guys did great on this paper, here's some general trends I'm noticing as we progress through the semester, really giving kind of a connective tissue to the whole class, because they don't get that beginning of class, end of class commentary from you that in-person students might. So you can use announcements for a lot of things, and that's part of why our administration has said that this semester, the expectation is that everybody sends at least one announcement in every class per week, because they are really important communication tools. And because they stay there, they're static, they don't leave. They're good for students to go back and get reminders, or I couldn't remember what she said, and they're always there in the class.
So a lot of times when we talk about communication and tone, what some people hear is that, oh, it should be very fluffy, and there should be cartoons and animations, and that's not my personality. Allegra and Natalie know that I'm probably much more serious than both of them. So this is one of my examples to my students, and it's friendly, it's encouraging. I'm telling them right here they can redo an assignment that most of the class didn't do that well on, but there's no cartoons. So you can do this and be true to your own personality without really having to stretch all that much.
And the last thing we want to talk about is responding to student questions and emails. And you don't necessarily need fluff, but you do need to couch what you're saying in some friendly terms. So one-line emails come off to students as abrupt. And even though you might be a very direct communicator, we don't have those nonverbal cues where you smile or you lean in toward a student to make so they know you're listening. You've really got to intentionally put that in writing so that your online students know that you're happy to take questions, that you're here to help them, and that you're an approachable human person. And the other thing is, just like Natalie was saying earlier, sometimes we make mistakes in our own online classes. And I have examples here of times that students have emailed me to say, this, I couldn't find this, or this wasn't working. And I made sure to say, I made that mistake. I forgot to fix it. Thank you very much for letting me know. And when a student emails me asking for help, or when a student emails me telling me they have problems, even if I'm going to send them a quick email because I'm emailing from my phone or I got 30 emails that day, I still want to make sure that it's friendly, because every email you send should be an invitation to the student to continue asking you questions throughout the semester. And if you think about your emails as invitations to communicate with you, hopefully it helps you set the tone a little bit differently. And at the end of the presentation, we have some examples of communications that don't really invite students to email them. And so hopefully we'll have time for those.
So one of the things that you want to make sure, that's important for students is to set the tone for your course. So let students know what your policies are. So we'll talk a little more about attendance, but certainly attendance is not optional, right? Attendance has to be taken in your class, in your online class, but we need to be clear with students, how is it that we're taking attendance? Are you taking attendance, weekly based on a particular assignment they turned in, or if they logged in, or what are you using to document that attendance? And then late work, what is your late work policy? Do you accept late work or not? And if so, how is that assigned in your particular class? Because remember, some of our students are taking 3, 4, 5 classes, and it may be that they have completely different policies. So we want to make sure that we share those in an easy way for students to find that in the class. Now, I believe Misty later on is going to give us more information about, she has some great ideas about discussion board etiquette. And extra credit is also something we'll discuss, some ways that we can be flexible with students by allowing them to earn some extra credit. And then, of course, Allegra will follow up with academic integrity. So I think that this is mine. So again, we have to take attendance, right? We just need to be clear with students how that attendance should be taken. So these are some examples of some policies that are in ICRs and syllabi that let students know. Also, it's important to let students know if you will or will not drop them, and if you are going to drop them, based on what criteria, so that that's clearly communicated up front to students.
And it is up to you what your late work policy is. I will tell you that our campus does not recommend zero tolerance policies for anything because of all of the circumstances that we've just been talking about. But that is certainly your policy. And Misty will tell you in a little bit what happens if you decide not to take late work, how you can build flexibility in other ways. I absolutely, positively accept late work from all of my students for every assignment except the final exam. The final I can't accept late because it's due the last day of class. But I make it very clear in the syllabus and very clear in the course calendar that if students need an extra day for an assignment, they can take an extra day. That costs me nothing. It doesn't impact my life at all. It doesn't negatively impact the student's education. It doesn't make anything harder. All it does is give students who are having a challenging time in their life a little bit of a break so that they don't make a single mistake that turns out to be fatal or final. So you just need to make sure that you have a consistent policy. If you are going to take late work, either from everyone or on a case-by-case basis or for particular things, you just need that consistent policy and you need to word it well. What we don't want to do is put in our policy, I won't take late work from anyone for any reason, and then make exceptions. That gives preferential treatment to students who are brave enough and confident enough to ask for an exception. So someone's not muted. So you want to make sure that if you plan to take late work for some reasons, that is clear in your syllabus. And you want to also avoid requiring students to give you documentation. If you're going to let students turn in late work because of health reasons, which we would highly recommend in a situation like the one we're in, you don't want to require students to submit documentation because then you become the arbiter of whether documentation is good enough or whether the documentation is authentic enough. You don't want to be in that business at all. And you don't want students having to disclose private health information to you either. The best rule is to just have a consistent policy that you could apply to all your students, to word it very clearly and stick with it all semester. So this is an example of a different person's policy, which is there's no makeups for any reason. All late work is due at this time. Lessons are open for exactly 2 weeks. This person is very explicit with their instructions and they let students know exactly what to expect, which is fine because I know whose policy this is and I know that this person lets students drop grades and give students opportunities for extra credit. And I think this is actually Natalie's.
This is mine. Yes, so I do accept late work. I'm not quite as free with the accepting of late work as Allegra, but I do give everyone one oops for a major exam. And the reason that I do that is because just after teaching online for several years, I know that there's always going to be a few situations that are legitimate and that I'm going to want to allow that student to make that up. So I decided several years ago, rather than, making them email me about the situation and deciding whether or not I thought that it was fair, I decided everybody across the board should get one of those, no matter what the reason, and that way it's fair. I do allow regular work, all my discussion boards, lab submissions, those things. I do allow those up to 3 days late regularly. Now, they do get 10% off each day, and the reason that I do that is I like timeliness and being organized, and so I want to encourage those students to stay on task because honestly, if they're keeping up with their work, right, they're probably going to have a better chance of being successful in my class. So I want to still encourage that, but give them some flexibility when they've had a rough week.
And you don't have to read this either. We'll share the slides with you if you really want to see what all of my silly announcements are. But this is just an example of an announcement that I posted on the day after something was due. And it says, your paper was due yesterday and I will accept it through tomorrow for full credit. I know that sounds insane to some of you, and that's okay. But in this case, I wasn't going to start grading it till the next day anyway. So it doesn't matter to me if it gets turned in on Wednesday instead of Monday. And the other thing is, 4 or 5 students had emailed me to ask if they could turn it in on Wednesday. And I said yes to every one of them. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to publicly, like intentionally put this message in the course because I want students who aren't brave enough or bold enough or confident enough to ask for 2 extra days. I want them to have the same benefit of the extra time. So I'm just going to advertise. I'm leaving it open for 2 extra days to let people submit it. And that way, everybody, even the shy person who's afraid to reach out and say, I'm having trouble, even they know they have extra time and they also don't give up. A lot of times, if it's a major research paper like this one, if somebody doesn't get it submitted on time, they just think they need to drop the class because they have no recourse. And so it's important to me that students don't feel like any single mistake or any single day late is fatal. I promise I'm done with my evangelizing of accepting late work.
All right, so discussion boards. This is something that I feel really, really strongly about. Discussion boards are not DIY. They do not run themselves. You have to be in there. You have to be proactive. You have to be responding to students. They should know that you're in there. This is the sample discussion board policy that's in the faculty guide, so feel free to start from there and then tweak as necessary. Something that I think is really important with discussion boards is sort of reverse engineering what you want. If you want an actual dialogue and you want students to engage and interact with each other, one way to have them do that is after you have them answer your questions, have them ask a question to their classmates. So that way, when students respond, they actually have something to respond to. And you're just going to produce deeper and more meaningful conversations in your students that way. Can we go one forward, Allegra? These are just other examples, and you guys can see some of the same language is being used here. But again, we just want to be really, really clear up front with what your standard is for your discussion boards. Exactly what are you expecting? When do you expect it to be due? How do you want it to be done? All of that should be clear before they ever even go to the discussion board.
So can we real quick before we move on, I think there's a question in the chat that maybe would be beneficial for everybody, that they like the idea of flexibility, but do you ever find that this disadvantages students who rush to get their work in on time, not knowing that you would end up opening it up for late work for a few days? And if so, do you accept new submissions for students who want to keep working? So I think for most of us, what we would recommend in general, you would make those policies up front, right? Where the students would always know I'm going to have an extra 3 days or, right, rather than deciding after the fact.
Yes, but I will also tell you in my composition classes, if a student says to me, I turned my paper in yesterday and today I realized that I had 5 mistakes in it, I will let them resubmit it because again, it takes me 5 seconds, it costs me nothing, and it's a great learning opportunity for students because what they've done is they've gone back, read their own paper and found things they want to improve. So they're making themselves better writers and there's no negative impact on me if they get extra time.
Got it.
But I know that I'm a crazy person, so
No,
it's
no,
okay.
no, you're not. We all have, I think that's the point, is everybody can be flexible in the way that works for their class and the way that they, grade. So, you may not want to take late work. That may not be the thing that you want to incorporate, but extra credit is one way that maybe you could incorporate some flexibility so that if a student does miss an assignment and they get a 0, it doesn't maybe prevent them, from passing your class or from making an A or a B. So I think I do offer some extra credit in my class. I have a couple stipulations about that. And the first is that my extra credit is offered throughout the semester. It is not offered at the end when you realize you don't like what you got at the end. So it's too late at that point, because the point of me offering extra credit is it either provides some kind of connection to I teach biology, so biology to their life, or it's helping them engage in the material, right, so that they learn it as they go. So at the end, that's done. The grade is the grade. The other thing about extra credit is I firmly don't believe that this should be something that would raise them like a whole from a C to an A, or even uh, a huge amount in their grade. It's something that maybe helps them if they had a bad performance on one assignment, but it's not the majority of the work that they're doing.
That's a great reminder, though, Natalie, that not all of these is going to work for you, but you have to choose, and you do have to intentionally put in that flexibility. So if you, like Angie, absolutely will not take late work, I see she's here evangelizing her attitude about it, but you do want to find other ways to build in flexibility, whether it's extra credit or OOPS tickets or other things that we have been or will talk about. So just some things to remember in terms of policy for extra credit. Definitely consider what is meaningful and think about ways that you could offer extra credit in your class and if you want to do it. Don't dismiss it out of hand. Consider whether it would be a good idea. Clearly explain to students what the parameter is. And here's what I'll tell you. If you say the words extra credit to students, they'll become very interested and they will have a lot of questions and they will have a lot of anxiety about making sure they get it done. So you really want to make sure that it's clearly explained. It's just like all of our conference attendees and the sign-in sheets. It's top of mind, so we have to make sure it's clearly explained when and how you get credit for doing the work. Give students options so that, for instance, you can't say go to this one play at this one time, and that's the only way to get extra credit. Give them a few opportunities to do it, because as you're saying in the comments, our students do have kind of non-traditional schedules, and make it relevant. So it shouldn't just be, draw me a picture, right? It should be relevant to the coursework. It should add value to their learning. And some things to avoid: exclusionary activities, so things that some students could not do, like giving blood, voting, donating things, buying things, doing things physically. Anything that is exclusionary or discriminatory against some students, you want to avoid. And you also want to avoid having so much extra credit that students can miss 2 exams and still make a good grade in the class. It shouldn't be a substitute for learning. It should be a value add. And while we're talking about course policies, it is very important that you have an academic integrity policy in your course. Our campus has a little bit of a more specific policy than the college policy, and that's because we have our peer-developed courses, which means that if you have to fail or drop a course this semester and you go to retake the same exact course with a different instructor next semester, there's a high probability that the assignments are the same. So we just have to explicitly tell students you can't resubmit the same assignments, you can't recycle your own work and get credit for them twice. But it's just important that you have this policy, just like the discussion board policy, that you put it in your syllabus, that you put it in your ICR, that you put it in your course introduction. You just make sure students are familiar, not just what the rules are, but also what the penalties are and what the recourse is if they are plagiarizing an essay, what would happen to them. It just needs to be part of your policy beforehand.
Okay, so as we mentioned before, there's several different opportunities to build flexibility into your class. You don't have to do all of these things, and probably it's not a good idea to do all of them, right? It's to select the things that work for your class and to build some of these into your class so that students know, and also to let them know up front in your course policies that these are the policies you have for, dropping grades, extra credit, optional meetings, those kinds of things. Now, one thing that I will say about optional meetings, I like to do those for my students and I get good feedback about those, but I recognize that when my students registered for my class, they didn't register for a particular day or time meeting. So I can't do any meetings and expect students to all be there, and I don't want to punish those that can't be there because of work or family or other schedules. So I record them for those students who can't be there and send the recording out, and I try to move those around so that I'm offering some in the evening, some, in the morning, some in the afternoon.
Absolutely. And I open things early. I open things weeks and weeks in advance, and I know that a lot of my colleagues do that as well. And that helps build flexibility for students who do have kind of unpredictable schedules. So if students don't know what their work schedule will be like next week, they can get a head start on next week's assignments this week. I do tell students, if you work ahead by a couple weeks, it's fine, but you will have to go back later to do the interactive discussion board pieces. You can't skip responding to peers or reading the responses you get from peers. But I do open things early, and that is a very easy, low impact way to put some flexibility in your course so that if students have crazy schedules, they can still get their coursework done. And I want to pause before Missy talks about dropping grades. We did get a question about how these policies align with core competencies, and that's a really important question because in the district master syllabus and in the coordinating boards, core objectives for English classes, nowhere does it say the student will learn to turn work in by 11:59 p.m. That's not a core competency for English class. And so it is important that students learn how to write and read and analyze and think critically and work together. And those are the competencies that I focus on. The same goes for extra credit. We want to make it meaningful so that it is related to course mastery and not just extra points for fun. So it is important to think about what your objectives are in terms of what you're trying to teach your students. And redos, which I think Missy is going to talk about, are a great way to have students both recover from a mistake but also learn from them.
So I had the policy earlier that said basically there's no late work for any reason. Don't email me about it. It's gone. It's passed. We're done. That is more because I am not organized enough to keep accepting late work as we go than anything else. But I realize things happen. Things have happened in my own life sometimes where I needed a little bit of flexibility. So my way of building that in is I won't take anything late, but I do drop certain grades depending on which class we're talking about. And I accept resubmissions, especially on big projects, because I think it's very likely, especially for our first year students, that they could get halfway down the road in a project and realize that they misunderstood something kind of basic. Me failing them for that project doesn't actually teach them anything. Them going back and redoing the work and doing it correctly does teach them something. So again, be intentional, think it through, but dropping grades or having resubmissions are both ways to be flexible if you won't take late work.
Mm-hmm. So some other clear policies you want to have, and this is from our faculty guide. You can copy and paste this into your syllabus. Just make sure students know what technology they need to be successful for the semester. Let them know they need, regular access to a computer with the internet. Let them know that, how to get access to Microsoft Office so they can use Word and Excel and PowerPoint. If you're going to have proctored exams or student meetings or your students have to record videos, let them know that they need a webcam and what the requirements would be. So again, this policy you can copy and paste right out of our faculty guide. You don't have to create it from nothing, but it is important to let students know, what do I need in terms of technology to be successful in this course? Because not all of our students have the same access on a regular basis. This is you, Misty.
I know. So I think there is a real tendency when we find something cool to want to immediately put it in our class. And that's awesome. But the problem is that you could find a bunch of cool stuff right now because you've been really diving into building this online class, and you can overwhelm your students. So your class should be more about content than it should be about bells and whistles. So just as an example, if I've got 1 week where we're using Padlet, and then the next week you have to get in a private Facebook group, and then the next week after that, everybody has to follow me on Twitter, that's probably too much. Because not only do they have my class, they potentially have 4 to 5 other classes. So whatever you're going to do, it's amazing, it's all awesome, it's wonderful, but maybe stick to 1 or 2 things. Don't overwhelm your students with technology.
And I think that's an important reminder, right? That they have other classes. And so this already looks overwhelming. These are all things that our faculty use regularly. And so are all of these. And so you can see how easily that would just become Not just crazy, but chaotic for a student.
Well, so many of our students also have K through 12 students at their home. So not only are they learning everything we want them to learn, they're also going to have to help their kids with all the stuff that they have now.
Which I know something is called Class Dojo, but I don't know what it is.
But it sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So I jumped ahead a little bit and talked about synchronous content, but since our classes, except for Week in College, there were a few Week in College sections that actually were advertised that they would be at a certain day and time. So absolutely those meetings can be held then. But for the rest of us who are teaching completely online e-learning asynchronous classes, we just can't require synchronous meetings for students because they haven't registered to do that. It may conflict with their schedule. Doesn't mean you can't have a synchronous meeting. It just needs to be optional, and there needs to be another way that content is shared with students. So if you can record that and share the video content once it's been captioned, then that's a great way to do that.
And something that has come up kind of more recently is this question of whether students should have their cameras on, or whether students should be made to have their cameras on. Faculty want a lot of times for students to turn on their cameras during synchronous meetings because they want to see that their students are paying attention. And also they want to see students' facial cues so they can tell if a student is lost, if people are getting confused, if people are kind of tuning them out. And we all know the importance of those nonverbal cues. We all miss nonverbal communication with our students and with our peers, but we would really recommend that you don't require students to turn their cameras on. There's a whole host of reasons, and this is very hot topic on Twitter if you follow ed technology themes on Twitter. But student comfort, some students don't want to look at their own face, some students don't want everyone else to be looking at them. Think about privacy. So when you were in college, would you want your professor in your house, in your bedroom, in your kitchen? Some students just don't have the bandwidth to broadcast video. We don't know where students are and how many people they might be living with. And so we don't necessarily want to see or have them show everything that's happening in a shared space. And also, you don't really know if someone's paying attention just by looking at their face. We all work differently. And if I look spaced out, it's because I'm listening very intently. And the other thing is, if you're going to require students to turn their cameras on, then you have to create some type of penalty for not doing it. And I don't really know what that would look like because it doesn't seem fair to give people a grade penalty for not turning their camera on while you're lecturing at them. So you just want to think about all of those things before you plan a synchronous meeting. Many of your students want to learn from you in a live environment. And so students having a live meeting is not something we're telling you not to do. It is a huge benefit. But requiring students to get on at a particular time or requiring students to turn their cameras on in a particular way can really make students feel kind of like this. And that's the opposite of how we want to make students feel, right? We want to make students feel like they're part of a collaborative, dynamic learning environment, part of a community of learning and discussion, and we don't want to make them feel like we're policing their behavior and their eye movements. And so we want to minimize that as much as possible. So our next few slides are some examples of what not to do. And the reason we're showing these to you is not to shame anyone, but really to just make sure that you're aware of how what you say comes across. All of these instructors mean well. All of these instructors want to engage students, enforce things fairly, and make sure students learn content so they can be successful. But these instructors maybe don't realize how their policies sound or feel to students. So the student engagement policy says students are expected to schedule all personal events around this class. That doesn't even sound possible, right? Some of you are logging into this meeting late because you had other things happening in your life, and that's okay, right? There is no grade penalty if you were 10 minutes late to the session because you had to eat a sandwich or because you had to help your child with something. And it should be kind of the same thing. So we don't want to tell students that our classes are more important than their lives.
So I'm sure some of you have had a student email you, you respond to it, and the student writes back immediately and says, "Thank you so much for answering this email. None of my professors ever write me back." I hope that we get less and less and less of those as we go forward.
Yeah.
But we do sometimes get them. And this is a policy that a professor has where he will not respond to anything that's text speak or has slang in it. But I would say, rather than have this policy, model the behavior you want to see. So if your student is too casual with you, reply in a bit more of a formal manner. Our students are smart. They'll pick up on the clues. And if they really, really need some help, start a paragraph with, answer the question first, and then second paragraph, as an aside, here's some helpful hints for communication. It's going to go over so much better.
That's a great point. And let me just add to that, especially after Shola's session. Listen, when we get an email from a student that is written in a way that maybe isn't professional, it might be, angry. I mean, like I can think of one that I received this summer that was very rude, saying, "Who did I think I was to ask them to purchase a kit right now during COVID?" And it was very accusatory. And, I think, yes, it upset me. And I said out loud what I would like to respond to the email. And then I drafted a very professional email that modeled how we should communicate and explained that the campus was actually paying for the kits. And, here, your textbook is actually free. It's an OER online. And I'm so glad that I did that, and I try very much to model that to students because the response, it changed completely the way the student responded. And for the rest of the semester, I never received another, really angry, negative email from the student. So I think you mentioned modeling, and I think that's a huge thing that we can do, no matter what, whether it's an email or in our policies, to model the best way to do something.
You also just want to be aware that you may think you're being cut and dry, but a student may interpret it as being rude.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been accused of doing this in my lifetime. So I understand. I understand the impulse to just, these are the facts. But really think through how somebody who's not in academia would read that. Because we have all gone through 4 years and then 2 to 6 more years. We are all well-versed in academia, in the culture, and the communication, all of that. Our students are not. So if you have a friend that's outside of academia, family member, have them read your policy and see what they think. Because if they're going to say, "Oh, this is rude," then absolutely your students are going to think it's rude too.
Yeah, and the phrase, "if I believe you're cheating, you'll receive a grade of 0." While I understand the meaning is I'm not going to wait for a preponderance of evidence, I'm going to use my professional judgment. What this sounds like is I can accuse anyone at any time, and as long as I believe that you're cheating, then you get a 0. And so we know, because you're professionals and we know you, that you mean well, but your students don't know that. And everybody has had a bad experience once in their life. And so there's always a little anxiety or trepidation about whether this instructor is going to be like that mean one you had that one time. And so we want to do everything we can to make sure our students know that we are reasonable people who care about them. And our goal is to teach them the content. Our goal is not to teach them how to follow rules or how to follow the exact intellectual competence. I mean, our goal is to teach, my goal is to teach them English. Nally's goal is to teach them biology. Missy's goal is to teach, I don't really know what. But our goal is not to teach them how to do things the exact way that we prefer. I was just kidding. Missy teaches history. She does a wonderful job. And the last thing, the last example we have here is that this person is telling their students that they don't want to be emailed at awkward times between 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Now, that's a great reminder if you're letting students call you on the phone. Please don't call me on the phone late at night or early in the morning, but we don't know when students are checking their email. And it doesn't really hurt us if students email us overnight. If your notifications are on and they bother you, turn your notifications off. Because again, we want to take every single chance we get to encourage and invite students to ask us questions, whatever they may be. We're scholars and we enjoyed school. That's why we went to graduate school. But not all of our students are comfortable in that environment, and not all of our students are comfortable asking questions. So our policies, our syllabus, our emails, our announcements, they're all opportunities to invite students to reach out when they have questions. And we should take all of those opportunities that we can. And when we say things like, please understand your instructor's not on star, I mean, to me, that sounds like someone's bitter because they had a student who expected really fast results, and we're kind of taking that out perpetually on future students. But that's our best advice, and we're going to have time. We've got time for a few questions. Your department meetings don't start until 4. So there's a built-in break, but we're here to answer any questions. I'm about to post a link for attendance. And I will say you're going to see on that attendance form a question about what your home address is. And that is not because we're stalking you. It is because we want to mail you something. So just keep that in mind.
That you would want.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we hope it's something that you would want.
There's a couple questions, so I'm going to ask this one and let you all chime in. But so the question is, if the department has a student learning outcome objective of 80% pass with a C or above, if one instructor allows late work, extra credit, etc., and another doesn't, won't this skew the reporting results? So I would say, I don't know. I think you certainly, your department chair or your dean could say, look, we don't want more than this percentage in the class of extra credit, or this is our policy. You know, you could have a departmental policy, but I think the student learning outcomes really, you know, don't deal directly with the policies in the class. I understand. I think you're talking about success rates, but that's sort of like, it's hard to monitor from instructor to instructor. You know, what if my test questions are easier or harder than someone else's? It's kind of that same, just different. It's a different instructor. It's a different class. Do y'all have anything you want to add to that?
No, I just think, you know, you have to pick the policies that fit for you. And while one instructor takes late work and another doesn't, it's probable that, and it's hopeful that they're building in flexibility in different ways. And yes, it is probably true that if I accept late work, as a result of that, my pass rates might be higher. But that doesn't, I don't know that that means it's something we should stop doing. But I think Missy wanted to say something also.
So I think Natalie covered the first part. Student learning outcomes are for students, not for instructors. So that's important to keep in mind. But secondly, when your department chairs are looking at your classes, I feel very comfortable. I'm just going to speak for all the department chairs at Connect because we're all amazing. We look at the holistic view of classes and not just your success rate. So I'm much more interested in how long does it take you to return an email? What does your student evaluation look like? Are you in your course consistently? Then is your success rate a tad bit too high or a tad bit too low?
Yeah, and I'm skipping, so if I'm looking down to find the questions, but this is a good question. How do you require that they view the recording? So I think this is referring to when we were talking about synchronous meetings. Is there a way to check? And so my answer, unless I don't know about it, there's not a way to find out if a particular student has viewed a recording. Now, if you really want a record or something points that they viewed the recording, I've done that a couple ways. Sometimes while I'm in the session, I will use a word or a phrase a few times and I write those down because I'll forget them. So they have to put those words, they have to give me those words in an email or in a submission. You know, the other thing you can do is add a little quiz at the end where they have to complete the quiz, and if they didn't watch the video, they might not be able to answer the questions in the quiz. But those are the ways. I mean, as we move to a new LMS, maybe a new video platform, there might be a way to do that, but I'm not aware of that currently.
Yeah, there definitely will be ways to do that with a video platform. But I mean, my short answer is that you require them to do it the same way you require them to do anything else, right? You find a way to assess their knowledge of whatever was contained in there. And so when we, for instance, do extra credit webinars, we ask students 3 or 4 questions to make sure that they participated and understood the content. But yeah, you can absolutely choose to give them an assessment over it or have them write a short reflection about it, anything like that, to make sure that they attended and understood the content that you went over.
Yeah, and then there's several different comments about how they handle like sessions, whether they encourage students to use camera or mic, or some say no, they like the chat. So I think, I know that Angie, she uses Flipgrid in her class to allow students to make a video recording, but she gives them the option to, if they don't want to use the camera, they can use a picture or they can use an emoji with text. I think giving students the ability to communicate in their way, whether that's through text or video or audio, really just gives them a greater opportunity for success and they feel more comfortable. And so Kenya brings up a point that you can mark something reviewed. The student can say that they can mark reviewed in our current LMS. It doesn't show you how thoroughly, I guess, they reviewed it, that they actually watched the whole thing or read it, but at least they have acknowledged that they have read it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've missed anything else, but we certainly appreciate everyone's attendance and participation. Are there other questions?
I will, just while we're waiting to see if there are, your department meetings start at 4. If you're not sure who your department chair is, you're welcome to ask us now. We have we have probably all the department chairs are here somewhere. And I know that a couple things switched recently, and sometimes people aren't sure because things are classified differently on different campuses. So if you're not sure which department meeting to go to at 4, you're welcome to ask, and we're happy to stay and answer any questions you have. We've got a little bit of time, but otherwise you're welcome to go and take a break.
Real quick, someone asked, there is not a separate sign-in sheet. So for Dr. Morales and Dr. Sullivan's welcome and Shola's main presentation and this session,
That's correct.
that sign-in sheet is for all of that. So if you sign that, you're in good shape.
I will post the slides so everyone has access to those.
So the department chair sign-ins are on the, yeah, got it. I mean, the department meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Allegra, do you have the sign-in? Let's see. I think it gets buried.
Also, some people's chat does not update, if I remember correctly.
Yes, you are right. And if that happens, I think if you go out of Teams, right, if you close out and then when you come back into Teams, you can access the chat and it may update at that point. And if not, we can always share it again in the department meetings.